Hello everyone, this is Philosophy, right, 72, Modern Philosophy, and this is week 10 for us. So we have, after today, we have two more weeks, so 11 and 12. And then you probably know already that I have scheduled, I sent an email, I have scheduled a meeting, Zoom meeting for tomorrow at 11. It's not a class, but like I said before, a way to touch base and a community meeting. So we had this one tomorrow, and then another one at the end of the semester, because for us, May 31st would be the last uh, meet. It would have been the last meeting, but in reality, I will do the last video for by May 31st. You do your entry on Blackboard, and then the day that was the day for the final exam, May 7th, right? Then we'll have another. That's when the last for you the last entry right is due, and we will have another Zoom meeting just to conclude the class. Okay, so in any case, and so you know that actually, yeah, May 31st is the last day for the Sunday classes. Probably June 4th is for a check the calendar for the weekday classes, if you have weekday classes as well. So, but in any case, today we continue with the tradition of existentialism that we saw last time, starting with Kierkegaard, that I said, reading from the book called the Sickness Unto Death, that he is considered a forerunner of existentialism by when the time when existentialism itself came into existence as a school of thought, a movement, right, within philosophy. But today we do Sartre, right? I mean, that's the name, the words that I put in the syllabus for today, Sartre's existentialism. And Jean-Paul Sartre, right? You can Google his name and see something. I will read from sections from an essay he wrote that became very popular at the time, but which is called Existentialism is a Humanism. Right, this would be the book, right? And well, I mean, a few words. I mean, Sartre became very popular, after right after World War II, in France, in Paris, and there was a whole movement, right, of the existentialist kind of movement, and then Sartre himself also. In addition, he started as an existentialist. He's also then became a Marxist, and he had a long, long, he wrote so much from the time even before World War II, of course, and then until his death, I believe, in 1980, and. So in any case, because there isn't much time, again, I want to call attention to some of these important moments, right? So think about this. I mean, I ask you to, again, that's a pointer, but you can use any other important problem arising from your reading of this and or any relevant passage, and elaborate on that or a few passages. I suggest, right, you can focus on the reversal, Sartre's reversal of essence and existence that I think I mentioned last time. I will go over again. This is really the main, if you will, tenet of the existentialist type of thinking, of different varieties of existentialism. What does it mean to say, I asked, that there is no exit from freedom? This is very specific to the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. I will go into that in a moment, okay? So, but in any case, think about this and write something. I mean, I did say that existentialism, existence in the existentialist tradition is a constant standing out, and we saw that with Kierkegaard there is this idea that the self itself is constantly in the making, right? It is the task of the self to make itself this paradoxical thing. We saw the play, the dialectical play between right finitude and infinitude, necessity and possibility or freedom, right? We saw the importance of the idea of the situation, right? Being in always in a situation from which then one can exit. I mean, from you can go beyond the change your situation by projecting yourself into something different and so on. This is always the case in the existentialist tradition, and it is the question problematized. I'll go back to that in a moment, by precisely thematized, problematized by Sartre in particular, Jean-Paul Sartre, as the question of freedom, precisely. This freedom, which is not what we usually think, when he says we are basically, keep this in mind, we'll go back to this, we are condemned to be free. That's one of the most famous statements in Sartre. I mean, a paradoxical thing, right? Because to be condemned is the opposite of what we understand as freedom, usually, right? I mean, to be caught, captured, and so on and so forth, right? But in any case, the idea is that the paradox has a very important meaning here, right? I mean, it is that there is no exit from freedom. And Sartre says that even in this essay that you're reading, right, which is called Existentialism, is a humanism, right? So, but the idea that the human being always has to make itself, just like in Kierkegaard, the self has to make itself. So no longer, although there is a relation, important relation between the Sartre and Descartes, with whom we began this class, but no longer the I think, the self, the I think, the mind slash soul of Descartes is, if you will, a simple, unified entity. We saw the deconstruction of this self throughout the course. We saw in Kierkegaard the self as the synthesis between two moments, always a relation and always therefore split, divided within itself, right? So what we see now is the continuation, if you will, of that, this idea that the human being, the human self, is constantly in the making, and that one cannot renounce, one cannot give up this task. So the task is the task, if you will, of freedom, right? That there is no exit from freedom. One is condemned to be free. Check this, pay attention to this idea, this statement by Sartre, and that therefore choosing is not an option, right? We cannot choose not to choose, because he says that in the essay, even when I choose not to make a choice, I'm still making a choice. Okay, so in a sense, it is the same logic that we saw in Descartes, precisely from that point of view. Sartre is close to Descartes. Remember that for Descartes there is no exit from thinking, and it is precisely because of this that I find myself for Descartes, and I find that unshakable truth that right he's looking for, because even when I think that maybe I'm not thinking, I'm still thinking, right? There is no exit from thinking for Descartes. Now, in the logic, the form of the logic is the same. So in Sartre, we had this idea that I cannot exit, I cannot right, that there is no exit from freedom, that I cannot choose not to choose, right? That not choosing, I repeat, is not an option. Okay, so we'll go back to this, but then the other point that I want to call attention to, I don't know how much time than we have. I will read a few passages, but the reversal, just to again make sure that we understand this idea of this philosophy, which was very popular at the time, right after World War II. In Europe and in the world, right? I mean, and there are, in addition to, we can't go into that, but there are, of course, many other names, and there are, you know, different varieties of existentialism, religious as well as non-really, like in the case of Sartre, right? He's an atheist, right? Existentialism, another important philosopher in the tradition that you might have, maybe you might have read books by him. He's a novelist as well, just like Sartre was. Sartre also wrote novels and plays, also important plays. One is called No Exit. But another one is Albert Camus, who wrote like The Stranger. He wrote The Plague, which is actually perhaps timely in a sense to read today. Albert Camus, you can check that as well. Simone de Beauvoir, maybe I will make some reference, another reference to her, but she also was a novelist, a philosopher. Right, I mean, one of the most important books that she wrote is called The Second Sex, which is a seminal book in the feminist tradition. And in that book, for example, in Simone de Beauvoir, that, by the way, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre were in a relationship, right, throughout their life, basically. But in any case, so they were close philosophically as well. And Simone de Beauvoir says, right, I mean, famously in The Second Sex, a woman is not born a woman, but rather becomes a woman, right? This becoming of whatever, then our self is said to be, right? Ultimately, our destiny. And as Sartre says, destiny is something that counts only at the end. We will see that in a moment, speaking about essence and existence, right? One is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. Check, Google this sentence as well, and you can use this also, relate this to what you're reading in Sartre, but that's very important too. And actually, it's not only about the condition of being a woman, whatever that means, right, according to different societies, cultures, and so on and so forth. That's the idea in the Beauvoir, but I leave to you to think about. But you can use any other category, so-called, of a social identity, right? One is not born X, one becomes X, right? So and so on and so forth. The idea is that again, there is no pre-established, predetermined essence, but there is existence. There is a constant standing out, a constant moving forward, projecting oneself. I think he says, not Sartre at one point, that the human being is constantly outside of itself. Let me use the neutral pronoun, and that's the idea, right? This constant making, which is precisely what existence as standing out means. And so there is no essence, which is the what something is, the nature of something. There is no nature. There is no nature to begin with. Okay, like the nature of what it is to be a woman, what it is to be, whatever other category you want to, you can apply this to precisely, the question of gender, but race and, all these other national, identity, religious identity, and so on and so forth, right? All these things that are made up in the sense that they are, constructs, right? As we say, right, social constructs and so on. They become real in any given context, any given cultural, social context, and so on. They become very real. At very time also. They become the source of oppression, repression, and so on and so forth, violence, right? One is then stigmatized and has to be right to remain in one whatever category which is assigned to them, stigmatized, labeled as such, and so on and so forth. You cannot be different from what, for example, you are allowed to be because of a set of social political, cultural, economic circumstances, right? But this is ultimately false. This is untrue because one can, as a matter of fact, find a way out, so to speak, the exit from the situation. It is only from freedom that there is no exit. I mean, we are constantly actually called upon, if you will, making a choice. We have to make a choice. Like I said, even if I choose not to choose, I'm still making a choice, and this choice, right, is precisely what arises from within the situation in which we always already are. We are in a situation, especially I said that last time at the beginning, especially of our existence, of our life, right? We are in a situation which is not of our choosing at all. Then, the situations that come later that we find ourselves in, right, throughout our life, they are, a combination, if you will, of circumstances, things that are not up to us, because not everything is up to us, of course, and also of choices we make, right? Good choices, bad choices, and so on and so forth. But we can change, okay? So that's the idea. So the idea is think about this reversal of essence and existence, right? I mean, something has an essence, meaning we know what that is, and things that we make. That's what Sartre also says, I believe, right? I mean, we make an object, things that we produce ourselves, we know what we are making before we make it, right? So there is this kind of a right, established essence, right, whatever, a table, a desk, a chair, and so on and so forth, right? But the same is not true when we deal with the question of a human existence. For better or for worse, the question is that there is no pre-established nature. What I am, what am I? Nothing, if you will, at the beginning. Nothing in the sense that I am not yet, right? I mean, I will become something, whatever I become, right? So there is no human nature, but there is, as Sartre says, he speaks of, instead of nature, human nature, he speaks of the human condition, which is completely different, right, from nature. But in any case, I hope that this is clear, right? These are the two perhaps main points that you have to keep in mind, this reversal of again essence and existence, meaning that essence comes at the end. It is only, if anything, at the end of one's life that people can say what someone was. Because until the end, one can change something, and therefore, right, one can. Of course, I cannot undo what I had done. I cannot change my past as such, but I can give, if you will, a new meaning to the past. By doing something else, I can, right, recast whatever I had done in then perhaps a different light, right, can give a different meaning and so on. So until the end, this is possible. So the essence, again, the what something is, the whatness is only what comes at the end, the destiny, if you will, right? But there is no destiny in the sense of predestination and so on. So in any case, that's the idea. Existence comes before essence. This reversal of the fundamental metaphysical, we spoke about metaphysics at the beginning of this class, position, the position that comes, I said probably last time, also speaking about Kierkegaard, from Plato, the tradition of Plato, right? And I think also when we did Nietzsche, I spoke about this, Plato, and then the Judeo-Christian tradition, Islamic tradition, they share the same kind of type of framework in that relation, that there is, a pre-established and so on nature, essence, and so on, right? That in any case, existentialism says the opposite, right? Existence comes before, so there is this essence, there is this reversal of the metaphysical position and supposedly an exit from metaphysics. Although, keep this in mind, the philosopher we do next time, we are not doing that essay where he says this, but another one, but Heidegger, we will do right week 11 and week 12, will say, speaking precisely about Sartre, right, and about this essay by Sartre, he will say, well, I mean, the reversal of a metaphysical statement is still metaphysical. So he says they don't really exit this kind of metaphysical paradigm, but in any case, that's keep this in mind. But that's the attempt with existentialism to say it is not that there is an essence and then everything follows from that, but rather there is no essence whatsoever. There is a constant. I can perhaps also use this word that I think I have. Right, I used at the beginning of the semester this constant individuation, right? What the process whereby something becomes the something that it is. Thisness. We spoke about thisness when we did this is not a pipe exercise with the painting by Magritte, and then we saw the concept of thisness when we did read Leibniz. Thisness, what makes this right, this individuation in precisely with Sartre in existentialism is a humanism in relation to human existence. This is not what happens, right? Again, there is no predetermined, pre-established essence. There is only a becoming, a constant process of becoming and of individuation. So I think I gave you this most important, right, um, keys to understand what Sartre is doing. Is ultimately not difficult. I mean, when then you read Sartre, and actually you see, if you, for example, studied ancient philosophy, also you see that many of the things that Sartre says, ultimately the basic ideas are and therefore existentialism, with all the novelty that it seemed to have at the time, right, in the 20th century, but that Aristotle in ancient philosophy says, much of the same. In any case, so there is, in this essay by Sartre, okay, remember again the two main points, right? Again, the reverse, okay, existence comes before essence, reversal of their relationship, and there is no exit from freedom. We are forced, we are condemned to be free, okay? So what he's doing here, this is, and he says at the beginning, the outset of the essay, it is a defense of existentialism, because many people were criticizing, attacking existentialism. So he decided to write this defense, and he starts by saying that it has been reproached, right, that existentialism is ultimately an invitation to people, right, to dwell. He says that's the second paragraph, beginning of this essay, right? I don't know if the pages are there. Page one, it's 14 pages, right? An invitation to dwell in quietism and despair, to be quiet, despair. But the despair that we saw in Kierkegaard is, of course, then something different, the motor of something different. And actually, precisely because of this question of, like I said, there is no exit from freedom. We are forced to make a choice. We are forced to be free. Again, we have freedom. I was saying this before. It's not whatever we may understand today. I do as I please. No, I don't do as I please, because I find myself also within a situation, and it is from within that situation that I can make my choice. So I cannot choose anything whatsoever, right? The choice is, as we saw already with Kierkegaard, concrete and so on and so forth, right? But however, at the same time, I am still in that position of having to make a choice, right? It's not simply, that I had this prerogative, right? No, as a human being, I must make a choice, even and this is found in the plays. If you want to read some of the plays by Sartre, very often, even ultimately, right, in conditions of captivity, one can maybe paradoxically, maybe it is an extreme situation, but one can still make a choice to a degree, and this is, if you think of it, is also true, right? But in any case, even under torture, Sartre says somewhere, that you can choose. I mean, it's not a choice in the sense of free choice to speak and not speak, right? And so on and so forth. But in any case, it is precisely because of this freedom, which is now we understand not I do as I please or whatever, the superficial and only positive right type, if you will, of freedom, but it is this indeterminacy and the uncertainty, the indeterminacy that that I face looking forward. Right, the future is not there yet. It is the not yet. It is nothing. Right. So in this indeterminacy, of course, then there may be also what we saw with Kierkegaard, this question of despair, but also the anxiety that Kierkegaard spoke about, that we spoke about last time in doing Kierkegaard, that Sartre is also emphasizing in this essay, the anxiety before making a choice, right? Before acting, before doing something important or whatever, there is always this anxiety which must be there. It cannot be the case that I do something which, or I make a choice which is likely to have, important consequences and so on, and I do it simply, just in lightly. I mean, there must be some type of anxiety. He gives examples, okay? So, but this is not, to say that existentialism is this type of philosophy that only leads people into precisely despair and so on and so forth. And then, you read these first highlighted sections, um, and then he goes into the question of subjectivity, the making of what one is the making of one's subjectivity for them, for Sartre, and for the existentialists. Then read all, because we don't have the time to go through this. There is a critique also of on the first pages of the religious variety of existentialism, and then he goes. By page 3, he goes into atheistic existentialism, he says, of which I am a representative, and so on and so forth. Then he speaks about this idea that precisely, that the human being, man, as he says, is. He says this, right? I mean, this is the paragraph that begins the second paragraph with the words atheistic, right? Existentialism, of which I am a representative. If you go toward the end of the highlighted section, right, 4 lines from the end, when he says, right, thus, see, thus, there is what I was saying before. There is no human nature, all right? Um, and then he says, because of course there is no God, right, to have a conception of it, just like we have a conception of the desk that we are about to make, of the book we are about to write, and so on and so forth. But there is no, author in that sense, right? There is no God. I mean, that's what Sartre also says in we saw this already with remember Nietzsche, God is dead, and so on. But in any case, even in the religious variety of existentialism, this becomes problematic, right? Even there is still this need to make oneself, as we saw with Kierkegaard as well, right? Who's a religious philosopher, no? And a Christian philosopher. So, man simply is, you find this short sentence right there, not that he is simply after already existing and so on. And then he says, there is this leaping into and towards existence, this constant moving forward, being projected forward. And then he says, man, this is an important sentence, you can build on this a little. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. Right? I mean, this is a bit maybe too strong, but like I said earlier, and Sartre then makes that clear in other works as well. I mean, it's not that I make myself just as I please, right? I mean, because there is a situation which is to begin with, it's not of my choosing. I find myself there, and there is always a situation in which I find myself partly because of the choices I have made, the actions I have done, and partly because of circumstances. So, I mean, this making of myself doesn't happen in a kind of a vacuum, and it is not a kind of generic abstract. No, I mean, it is very concrete from the concrete situation in which I find myself, okay? And then he says that this is what people call subjectivity, okay? So this is an important sentence that I just read, but the concept of this uh, you know, uh, comes back over and over again. So then there is also the question of the responsibility that he speaks about, that we are, each one of us, each human being is responsible for uh, all humanity. And this also is close to, in a sense, another philosopher that we haven't studied in this class, but maybe I mentioned, Immanuel Kant, and you can check that as well. The principle of the categorical imperative. Okay, categorical imperative. Check that. But in any case, to go to Sartre, what he says, I'm still reading from page 3. If, however, it is true that existence is prior to essence, right? That I spoke about, man is responsible for what he is, right? The human being is responsible for what human beings are responsible for what they are. Again, this must be taken with some caution. Again, that does mean that it is completely up to me to be right. And like I said, then Sartre clarifies that, qualifies that. I mean, the situation is very important. Okay, but from in any given situation there is a degree of things that I can do, can make. There is this ultimately, again, let me know if this is clear or not, meaning, contact me with questions. There is this irreducible freedom, cannot be reduced, it cannot be taken away, right? So freedom is in Sartre, and I can use this word because we used that at the beginning of the class. Actually, when we were in the face-to-face situation, we spoke about this metaphysics ontology. Ontology, the science of right being, that which is, and freedom in Sartre, right, is precisely an ontological category, if you will. It has ontological value. It is the ontological ground, meaning the freedom is the same as being. I mean, on the human plane, if we speak about human existence, to be is to be free. Ultimately, for Sartre, okay, and so with this freedom also comes responsibility, because when I make a choice, then I choose something that will be important, have consequences not only for me but virtually for everybody. He says all humanity, but ultimately even you know the world as we know today. You know, the climate, the other, the non-human animals, and so on and so forth. In the sense in which everything we do then has an impact on other things, affects things, affection that we saw in Spinoza. Okay, so responsibility, and he says. So we have a completely different concept of responsibility in Sartre than in Nietzsche. If you remember, when we saw, right, the class on Nietzsche was when was that class? We had two, but especially the one when we spoke about. Right, that was week 7 on the genealogy of morals, the question of responsibility, especially in the second essay, right, completely criticized by Nietzsche. So it was a different understanding of responsibility, but here responsibility comes precisely not because of the promise, right, that we saw in Nietzsche, but because of the freedom that we have. Again, it's not that we have, that we are. We are that freedom, right? That's the ontological meaning of freedom. The freedom that we cannot not be for Sartre, that we are forced to be, right? So with that comes a responsibility because we had to constantly choose, make a choice, okay? And then he says, speaking about, right, I mean, that's the first effect of existentialism, I'm reading, right, is that it puts every man, the language is gender at the time, every man and woman, right, every human being, but I read, okay, every man in possession of himself as he is, and places the entire responsibility for his existence squarely upon his own shoulders. And when we say that man is responsible for himself, Sartre continues, I'm reading, we do not mean that he is responsible only for his own individuality, but that he is responsible for all men, for humanity as a whole, right? Think about what this might be, you know, the way you can relate to this, what you think of it, whether you agree with this, what you can make of it. And again, you can also go beyond the confines of the human context and see what it means to be responsible for, um, you know, all beings as well, and because of what I was saying before, because of the impact that what we do has on things, right? So in any case, again, we can just to suggest one, to give a pointer, I mean the environmental, right, imbalance that we have brought about, climate change, right, global warming, um, right, caused by human action, by the use and the abuse of like things like technology and so on and so forth. Okay, so I mean this is just a suggestion, a pointer. Okay, because I want to. This is still page 4, but we had to soon wrap up. But in any case, you will find again similar themes, problems. Okay, maybe phrased in a different way, in a different context, but we have seen the most important points already, I believe. Okay, so think about what this means. I read another sentence which is also good right here. When we say Sartre, this is toward the end of page 3. When we say the man chooses himself, right? That doesn't mean that one chooses oneself the way one chooses clothes in the morning, right? Or a car, or a new smartphone, and so on and so forth, right? So when we say the man chooses himself, we do not mean, I keep reading, that everyone of us must choose himself, but by that we also mean that in choosing for himself, he chooses for all men, all humanity, right? I mean, again, if we had the time, we will speak more about that, but as a suggestion, if you want to check, what Kant's, Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, categorical imperative is, you will see some correlation here, okay? um, Again, so our responsibility has to do with humanity as a whole. So again, this is why also there is this sense of then he goes into the question of anxiety, and words like anguish, that abandonment, despair, and so on. Okay, so he then mentions Kierkegaard on page 4, and actually the story of Abraham that I mentioned last time in the video, the class on Kierkegaard, right? The story from the Old Testament of Abraham sacrifice, attempted sacrifice of Isaac, right? So then Sartre goes into this in a very interesting way. So read it, and then he speaks about abandonment again, and the question of God comes back, and he mentions Dostoevsky. That if you remember, we already saw, I mentioned, right, Dostoevsky, and precisely what Sartre is referring to when we did Nietzsche, right? I mean, if God did not exist, then everything would be permissible. And then Nietzsche draws the consequences, so to speak, God is dead. You find that on page 5 in Sartre, and then he speaks of, he goes into this question of the making of, precisely, which is the most important thing, ourselves, and also the question, which is in this sense close to Nietzsche, that we had to invent our values, we can't rely on the past ethical, moral, cultural, whatever tradition. We had to invent. Okay, that's what he says. This is the top of page 7. You are free. You are free. We know now what this being free is, right? Therefore, choose. You have to make a choice, and that is to say, invent. Right? So again, without relying on what. So that's why again there is this sense of despair that we saw in Kierkegaard, this anxiety, and you will read all the other, the whole thing is only 14 pages, but they underline the highlighted, sections, passages, okay, especially pay attention to that. This is toward the end of page 8, right, the end of the next to the last paragraph on page 8. What we mean to say, and this is a repetition of what I mentioned already, what we mean to say is that a man is no other than a series of undertakings. What I do, what I make. That he is the sum total, the organization, the set of relations that constitute these undertakings. Okay, and so basically that's the idea. Then he gives some examples. The one, for example, one is not a coward by nature, by definition, but one becomes by the things one does, one becomes courageous or cowardly or whatever. And this is again what we might find in Aristotle. If we read Aristotle, the formation of what for Aristotle is then the making of our moral character, that here might be the making of the self, of subjectivity. And here, in the next paragraph, then this is still page 9, kind of the middle paragraph. The destiny, not in the sense of predestination, the destiny of man is placed within himself. And then he says there is no hope except in action. Okay, so one has to make something, right? I mean, it's not simply by thinking and so on and so forth. By action, he stresses this point over and over again. Then you will see he speaks about the dignity of a man. He goes into then Descartes and Kant that I mentioned before, and but we can't go over all these things. So I want to rather start wrapping up, right? Actually, do it, and. Then he speaks of the universality of human existence for the things that we have said, also the choice and the responsibility that involves humanity as a whole. So basically, I think that this is what you need to, think about in relation to Sartre, but also in the middle of page 11, there is this other. That goes back to the question of invention, the need that we had to make ourselves and to invent things. There is a relation here to Nietzsche, right? And also what he says in the middle of page, precisely, what was the page? 11, right? Rather, let us say that the moral choice is comparable to the construction of a work of art, which is, remember, Nietzsche speaks about. Nietzsche says that we had to make this transition from metaphysics, religion, morality to art, right? Life as art. So same similar in Sartre, there is this creative situation that he speaks about. There is a common, he says, there is this in common between art and morality, right? The moral, whatever values we may have, and so on. Choices that in both we have to do with creation and invention. Okay, again, we cannot simply rely on whatever comes from the past. We had to become responsible, and then for ourselves, our own actions. That's what Sartre is saying. And then at the end of the bottom of page 13, and then I really wrap up. There, man is all the time outside of himself. This is the standing out that I spoke of, the standing out of existence, this ecstatic thing, this being always outside of oneself, therefore always projected forward, right? I mean, always doing something with, by aiming, if you will, at something, okay? Which is also some concept, a problem that we find in various philosophical, traditions before Sartre, before Sartre, before existentialism. Again, in Aristotle, for example. But this is, there is this stress put on the idea of being always outside of oneself, and therefore this standing out. This ultimately what we saw in Kierkegaard, this right, going out of the finite into the infinite, this constant, Kierkegaard says, infinitizing oneself, and then the finitizing, the coming back, the return as well into a new situation. Okay, it is, I'm reading, okay, using the word, Sartre, right, the word that I used, we will see this in Sartre. Again, it is in projecting and losing himself beyond himself. Right, that's kind of suggested that he makes man to exist. And on the other hand, it is by pursuing transcendent aims that he himself is able to exist. Think about the infinitizing moment in Kierkegaard. Okay, so then he says that man, the human being, is this self-surpassing, self-overcoming. Right? It's the same situation that we saw. Okay, and this is what basically you had to consider. Think about, read the whole thing again. Actually, since we are having the Zoom meeting tomorrow, it's not a class. You can also ask questions, and we will, make speak about the class and make comments, questions, or also you can email me, and so on. do then write for next week, right? The entry on this as well on Sartre, and see you. I hope many of you tomorrow, right? At the Zoom meeting. Okay, bye.